So thank you very much. And whilst I'm trying to, so sorry for arriving late, but I was supposed to arrive yesterday, and then there was an electricity problem in the airport of Brussels. And then you realize all this thing about Internet of Everything and big data. Well, if there is no electricity, c'est fini. So you can just go back home and take the next plane the next day. So it was this morning. So let me now see presenter view. Voila. There we are. So thank you very much for the introduction. So I will speak in the first place as someone from the European Commission who is in charge of developing the policies with regard to open access, open science, open data, text and data mining, etc. So everything which is related to this field, which is increasingly getting important also at the policy level within DG RTD, as you can see. So I'm part of DG RTD. A lot of it we do together with our colleagues from DG Connect, the ICT people. We do follow very closely also what RDA is doing, so we are trying to keep on top of that. So for those who didn't realize it, so we have a new commission since a while, and since I am supposed to tell you about the European policy, well, you should know that our commissioner, Commissioner Moedas, is part of the team who is responsible for the digital single market, which is led by Günther Oettinger, the Commissioner for Digital Economy and Society, and which falls under the responsibility of Vice President Ansip, who, as you know, is an extremely strong advocate of going digital, as a former President of Estonia, who is, as you know, a very active country in that respect. So that means that for us, we have to channel our policies in that new cluster. So if you look for where to find our policies in the jungle of websites of the Commission, try to Google DSM, and then you will get DSM Digital Single Market, and you will see we are there. We are very lucky that our new Commissioner is not only a younger guy, but also is very much behind what you are discussing here today and what I will present you there. So we really have a very supportive ear there. He comes from the open innovation side of the field of openness, if you want, but he immediately picked up the issue of open science, and I just give you one quote there too, so that politically speaking, at least, we are on the safe side. Now, so I was asked to talk to you about what is our view and what are our policies on open research data. What are we developing? What are we doing? How do we see it? Well, and it was already touched upon in the presentation of Mark Parsons from RDA, of course. So we see, just as RDA, we see the whole development as for open research data as an inevitable and irreversible trend in how the new way of science is going. It's very important, I think, to stress that it is not something happening in isolation. Open research data is part of what I mentioned there, a much broader change that you could call this, a move towards open science, a paradigm shift towards open science. So call it how you want it, but a fundamental change. It's not a marginal change. And indeed, we think, and that's the perspective in which we work. So in this DSM thing, so we are pushing for open science, and part of it is open data. So I go back a little bit to the top level. So we see it as part of open science, which we see as a systemic change in the modus operandi of science and research. As fundamental, I would say, as 2 or 3 changes that have been going on before. And it affects, and that's important, that's also why I think it is complicated and why we need initiatives like RDA. It affects the whole research cycle and all of its stakeholders. So it's not only a researcher thing or a data science thing, it is affecting publishing, universities, careers, funders, and scientists all together. And that's how we present it. You know, the classical way of doing research is the green. The new way of doing research, the open way, if you want, we call it open science, is all the bubbles which you see around it. And open access and open data are only 2 of the bubbles of the new ecosystem, if you want. But that's important because that makes everything related to each other. If what you just picked up, the last point you made on we need data skills, we need data scientists, we need data courses. Well, it will only follow, that's logical, that's the result of what is happening, but it will only follow if universities will grant it in their curriculum and will make it possible to make your career on it. And that's why we are saying it's a complete change. It's not only, by the way, this is copyright. This is a joke, this is a joke. So this is a joke. So, but I can't resist it. So it is all fitting together, and open access, the move to open access is part of that broader move of open science, which in itself, if you look at it from a sociological and economical point of view, is part of a broader move towards open society. If you want collaborative economies, you know, open software, it's all part of the same movement. Okay, that's the big picture. Now, as a policymaker, the first thing, and also as a scientist, it helps to know what you're talking about. So, what are we actually? What is our domain on which we can work? If you try to visualize it, you have open access to publications, the yellow dot. You have open access to the data leading to the publications, because that is what our policies are all about. Then you have all the open access, or all the data which are there for, which are being used for data-intensive science, but which are not necessarily going into the open research data or the open research publication level of handling. And then you have, of course, around that the sea of big data, which is actually being created on a daily basis. If we go to an internet of everything, so not only of things, but of everything, then the exponential growth of data is simply, I don't know, simply unstoppable is not the right way to say it, but it is to be foreseen to be increasing extremely fast and heavy for the next X years to come. So, but of course with a policy you cannot capture everything, and you have to focus on something. So we focus on the yellow and on the red dots. So our policies are mainly concerned with open access to publications and open access to data, because all the rest is, and there you come in difficult discussions, and you touched upon it in the previous speaker, you come in difficult discussions with where do you situate private data in an open research data environment, which is easy to say, but it's not easy to solve. So we are focusing on that, and that I think is important for you to keep in mind. And we see it as part of the move towards open science, to data-driven science, and we see in the main, and that is where we are grateful to our commissioner, he immediately saw the opportunities it gives for transparency, reproducibility, and hence much more efficiency and performance of our science system. In a certain sense, opening up the data, opening up the publications is giving more value to the investment you make as a public policy maker. And that is, I think, in the meantime accepted by everyone and already demonstrated in several issues. So I think that, I also think, but I don't have to convince a scientific environment that it has enormous opportunities for science. All big challenges are data-driven, so it will help us to tackle much better the challenges ahead. If you talk about climate change, well, without big data, you can forget it to do any research on that or any judgment on that. It also is, and I mentioned it once because we do this several times for social sciences as well. It has enormous opportunities for social sciences. We should not forget that. It is not only about the computer geeks who are here in the driving seat. On the contrary, I really think, and my first degree was in social science, this will revolutionize social science, because you will be able to measure social life in real time just as you can measure physics. So, and hence the term was coined by an MIT professor, social physics. So you will be able to study social reality as good or as exhaustive as you will be able, as we are able to study physical reality. So enormous opportunities. So we cannot miss it as a European continent, and we cannot miss it as a policymaker, and that drives our initiative. So we're not trying to wait and see, but we're trying to push the agenda because we believe in the opportunities and in what it can deliver for our science system. So opportunities scientifically and more efficiency of the investment. That's actually what drives us. Nevertheless, there are a few little details to look at, which you see there. So there are important, huge policy questions around text and data mining in big data and data-driven science, around open access, around copyright, around data protection, and then around what we call the cloud. I will develop some of them in the coming. So as I said, our main concern is to enhance the impact, and that's not only economical, also reproducibility is enhancing the impact. So we want to enhance the impact of publicly funded research with the tools which we have. At the European level, FP7, well, it's gone now, and Horizon 2020, the research program, and of course trying to influence or trying to coordinate or trying to support member state policies in that direction. So, our policies, you can, this is the first slide you get if you join the European Commission. Imagine you would have that idea. Well, the European Commission is a policy maker, a funding agency, and a capacity builder. So we make policies, we fund research, and we stimulate capacities. And our policies, you can divide them according to these three layers. And I will give you the key policies in that respect. So as a funder, our main tool is using Horizon 2020, which is one of the biggest funding programs in the world, to push the agenda for open access in Europe. That's actually bottom line what we do. We do it on two levels. First, we make open access to publications is mandatory if you apply for a grant in Horizon 2020. And we have set up a quite interesting pilot with open access to data, which is not mandatory, which is voluntary. And I will develop very shortly what we do there and what are some of the first lessons. So open access to publications. Well, I assume you know this more or less. We are requesting that whatever comes out, if decided to publish from a research grant or a proposal from the Commission, it should be put in a green or gold open access way. So green repository at choice, gold immediately accessible together with the publication. There is a whole debate there about the access charges with the publishers. Remember, it affects everyone. Their business models are also changing, so that explains a little bit of the debate behind there. But still, the push is there, and this has helped that. Recent studies have shown us that in Europe, close to 50% of all peer-reviewed published articles are now in open access in green or gold, which is a huge success. If you consider that 10-15 years ago it didn't exist, and the mentality change that was needed to get there. So I'm not saying this is only the Commission, on the contrary. I mean, there are in the UK very strong pushes for that. The big trusts in the Wellcome Trust, for example, is pushing a lot. NIH is pushing a lot, but it's part of the same movement. So I think we have a quite successful policy there. So. Much more tricky, much more complicated. It's a little bit, not complicated, but much more less straightforward as open access to publications, of course, open access to data. And there we have set up in Horizon 2020, which is now running in its third year, a very significant pilot, which is dealing with open access to data in a few areas on a voluntary basis. It allows you to opt out. You can also opt in if you're not in the area selected, and there are some precise data management plan provisions to be fulfilled there. So let me quickly run over it, because I assume this is what you're most interested in. So these are the areas which in the work program 2014-2015 we suggest the pilot to take off. So future and emerging technologies, research infrastructures, leadership in industrial technologies, and so on. We are now discussing for the next work program 16-17 to add nanomedicine, new areas, for example, to be added there. But this is the basis, and it's quite significant. I'll come back to that in terms of what it means in projects. So these are the areas. So projects may opt in the pilot. Sorry, may opt out. So if you submit something in that area, you're supposed to take part in the pilot, but you can ask for not having to take part of it if First of all, your project will not generate data. Secondly, if there are all kind of conflicts to be foreseen at the level of security, personal data, privacy, and so on. Anyway, you see it there. So there is always a possibility. It's not mandatory, because that was an impossible compromise. I regret it, but still, that's the reality. So it's not mandatory. It is voluntary. You have the possibility to opt out. Vice versa, the areas which are not covered can also decide on themselves to opt in. And there are some significant figures there. So, what are the type of data which have to be made openly available? So first of all, we are talking about those data, remember the red circle, those data which are needed for the validation of the publication. So not all the data used for a project, because that's a serious concern of some of the private partners in particular, are falling under the open data pilot. So in that respect, we are much less restrictive than, much more restrictive, sorry, than the policies you were advocating. And it will allow, if for those who are participating in the pilot, of course, is that they can deposit their data in the repository of their choices. We are funding a few repositories. There are many repositories. I think the latest figure about the UK is close to 100. So there are many repositories which are available anyhow, and it will allow you then to take part in the mining, etc., of what is available. So that is a pretty straightforward approach. Several areas, voluntary opt-in and opt-out possibilities for those who have some conflicts with making their data publicly available. What is mandatory is, of course, that you need to submit a data management plan. You don't need to have it up front when you propose the project, but it has to be delivered within the 6 months of the proposal, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. If you submit it at the end, well, then the project is over. So this is pretty straightforward. The DMP plans are mandatory for all the projects deciding to participate in the pilot, optional for those who are opting in on their own initiative. And then, of course, the questions which you have to fill in if you do the DMP section of your proposal is what are the kind of data, what are the standards, and there are some recommendations there, and so on. So that is all, I would say, at the general level, the kind of policies we are advocating with regard to open data. Now, what are some of the results? Because that's interesting. And remember, for publications, we are close to 50% now in Europe, if not more, depending on the area. With regard to the pilot on open research data, the take-up of it, so we for those opting in the pilot in the 7 areas, plus those opting in from other areas. So we analyzed 3,054 proposals. These are not granted projects, they're proposals. And as you can see, it's quite encouraging. So only one quarter opted out, but conversely, more than a quarter from those not in the 7 areas opted in. So you balance a little bit the opt-out from the first range. So it is quite significant. 1 in 4 opting out, but it's also significant 1 in 4 opting in. So I think there we are on the right track. So the results are, although preliminary, because they are proposals, they are I think encouraging, and I can easily foresee that in the next round it will only increase, because in the meantime open data is no longer a kind of an obscure topic. It is becoming more and more mainstream in academic discussions and in policy discussions. So that's where we are with regard to the pilots, to publications, to data. Now, what else are we doing? So we are continuing to analyze the uptake of the open access. We are now looking into the granted projects, so not only the proposals, those who got the contract. So there might be a significant, there might be a difference there. We don't know it, but we will let you know as soon as we have the results. We are studying the DMP implementation project so that we can come up with some best practice proposal based on all the first wave of DMPs received in the different projects. And of course we continue monitoring the open access policies which at member state level for publications as well as open data are being developed to see that if there is a kind of a follow-up effect or spillover effect from what we do in Brussels at member state level. On top of that, we are financing in the framework program some considerable and some important coordination and support actions which maybe you heard about, but for example in FOSTER, Poland is an active participant. So these are things supporting the policy process, supporting the capacity building, and FOSTER is about training if you want, and supporting the implementation open air of the open access policies in Europe. So this is what is happening at that level. With regard to the open access policy, if we then go and look as a policymaker what is happening in the member states. So we did, at the end of last year, we did an overview of open access policies using the national points of representation, the NPR. We did a scan of and a questionnaire, what are you developing at the level of publication, at the level of data. Some of the general findings which you can see there are, in my view, also encouraging. Although, most of the open access policies are soft measures, and personally, because you asked me also to have some personal views, I think this is the right way to do. It should not be imposed. It should be a soft approach rather than a hard approach, although there are some significant exceptions. Most of the policies are with regard to promoting open access to publications. Open access to data is still less developed at member state level, although, as I said, at the level of infrastructures, in particular repositories, you see across Europe a lot of member states taking some very serious initiatives there. It is no surprise, of course, that richer countries or bigger countries are much more active there, because indeed it requests some investment, and we are considering how we can overcome a potential data divide, if you want, in the future. So this is one of our concerns of the future. With regard to open research data in Poland, your countries, we didn't make a kind of a ranking, but from the top of my head, it is somewhere at the top of the middle group, if I would say, in terms of countries pushing, countries doing, and countries following. So I would position you there somewhere in the middle, but that is not an empirically based observation. It is on the top of my head, so please don't quote this. So you have several interesting initiatives ongoing there. Well, you know them yourself, and you are, as I said, and I think it's very important to be active in FOSTER, which is a training program, if you want, for open science, open data throughout, particularly targeting young researchers in Europe. And there will be a follow-up for this as well in the future. So that is where we are with regard to open research and open data. Now, our latest big thing on which we are working, and there we come very close to our colleagues and friends from RDA, we are considering and discussing, but this is premature, this is work in progress. I cannot announce this as a policy. This is something we are discussing with the stakeholders, we are discussing with the technical people, we are discussing with big players like RDA, with member states, is the idea of a European open research cloud. It's part of the DSM strategy that we should do something in that respect. I'll come back to that in a second. And as I said, we are now putting the first blocks of the puzzle on the table, try to make sense out of this. Now, and I think this is, for your community, quite interesting to follow, and it might help us to overcome, in particular, what I said, this digital divide. As you maybe know, and that's the end of my speech, the last 4 slides. As you maybe know or remember, last year we did a big exercise in a questionnaire and throughout Europe, where we asked the stakeholders, so you, a battery of questions on how they saw the evolution of open science. Remember what I said in the beginning, and what is ongoing, what are the drivers, what are the effects, and what do you see as the problems. We got close to 500 responses there, which are not only individuals, more than 200 organizations replied. And if Leru or EARTO replies or Alea, then you have, if that's only one reply, but actually it's thousands of members behind it in a certain sense. So it is quite significant. Plus we did a lot of validation workshops. And what was interesting there is that out of that came one of the key concerns of the scientists, of the stakeholders, of the publishers, of the funders, of the infrastructure people is actually that, as you see there, close to 85% unisono agree that we need to do something in Europe at some level, twice some, with regard to data infrastructures. And in particular, as you can see there, as regard the hosting, as regard the access and the services, and as regard the governance. Because, in particular, the governance combined with access and hosting is a key issue to tackle in Europe. We have 28 systems of privacy, we have 28 systems of taking care of health records, we have X many systems of and traditions on how we handle these things. So if you want to set up a pan-European big data project on health and try to combine it with transport results, well, good luck, and it is simply impossible. So the idea is, and that's how the discussion came with the European Research Cloud, where a virtual environment combining the infrastructure part, the access/processing part, and the governance part, would that make sense as a solution for the hosting problems? Because of big data and data-driven science, we will have to host it somewhere. It was very elegantly evocated by the previous speaker. For the access problem and the processing problem, and for the governance problem. So that's a little bit the idea behind it. And so we are trying to develop, no, we are not trying, we are developing this thing, which is a huge exercise, which is, as you just saw, the RDA, which, and they present themselves as only working at the technical level, already has how many people working on it and how many working groups. So if you try to capture the whole thing, it becomes even more bigger and complicated. But anyway, there it is. So we are seriously considering it because there is a demand for it. The question is, of course, if there is a policy need for it. There is a demand from stakeholders and funders, but does that mean that you have a policy case? Because if the market is there to solve it, well, why should we do it? You see, so that is really important to find out all these details, even though there is a demand for hosting seamless services and so on. There is already a lot existing. And we need to federate what exists. It would be simply stupid and counterproductive to say, okay, you know what, we create a huge data center in Brussels somewhere in the basement of Berlaymont, and then someone will govern that. I know it is impossible, but you see what I mean. So we have to work with what is existing, try to federate it, and that's where RDA is extremely important for us to follow, because that's one of your key achievements, I think, is trying to federate the access to the existing repositories and hosting services. And then, of course, see what we can do there in terms of how will this create, hopefully, value for big data science and all the spin-offs that are possible there. So it's a big thing. If you look at the landscape of what exists in Europe, and you take, and this is the penultimate slide, so the more you go to the left, the more data intensive and the more advanced the scientific discipline is with regard to the issues of hosting. The more you go to the right, the less advanced it is, and so the graphs give you an indication of the intensity. This is just, this is not nominal. This does not respond to a certain value. It is just to give you a certain indicator. We all know that physics, CERN was mentioned, is of course leading that. Although, however, this is mainly addressing one layer of what could be a cloud, of what is needed, which is the data layer. But what is actually even more needed if we want to go for big science, data-driven science, open science, is a service layer. And thirdly is, of course, the whole governance layer. And that is, it's also copyright, by the way. So this is the complexity of the issue. So if you talk about open data, if you in a perspective, and now I'm trying to come back to the beginning of open science, meaning it is much more than only hosting. which is in itself enormous, you have to address 3 layers. You have to address a disparity between the disciplines. Some disciplines very well served, others which we have to find something because they hardly have repositories. So you have to address actually a triple matrix, so to speak, of complexity, and that is not so easy to do, and that is where I really call on everyone. And again, we try to follow RDA in that respect very close. That is, I think we have to work together there because, and then I close. So this is again the same. So because I really think, and this is the last bullet. The rest you can read later if you want. This is repeating all the rest. It will only work, our approaches to open science in general, open access, open data in particular, and the cloud in between, if we accept that it is a bottom-up and stakeholder-driven exercise. It will not work, that's crystal clear with the hundreds of discussions we had throughout Europe. If we want to come up with a top-down or a kind of a Brussels engineered solution, it will simply not work, and it is not necessary, and I think counterproductive. So we do believe that it's an important issue, but we need to work together there. We have to see what exists and try to federate it, and then make it, as we say in informatics, interoperable throughout Europe. So that is, in a nutshell, what we are doing today, what we are planning to do in the future, and for which I hope we can count on the support of the ICT community and the data scientists of Poland as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have got actually a mix of commissions and personal views.
Yes.
And I'm really happy now to offer floor for a number of questions and comments.
Wojciech Fenrich, ICM University of Warsaw. I would like to ask you about this opt-in, opt-out rule implemented in the policy. What were the reasons given by those who would like to opt in, and what were the reasons given by those who would like to opt out? Were there any reasons?
Yes, sure. Because if you opt out, you must give a reason. So you must give a, I'm trying to find it, you must... So if you opt out, this must be one of the reasons. So you must not, because you cannot answer because I don't like it or I don't believe in it. So you must give a good reason why you opt out. The reason for opting in is mainly because the fields or the projects or the proposers behind the project are so convinced that open science is the way forward that they decided to take part on a voluntary basis. But again, and that's my personal view, I would be highly surprised if by the end of the framework program, meaning in 5 years' time, the DMP, the open access to data, will not be mandatory. If you look what the private NIH is mandatory, Wellcome Trust mandatory, Bill Gates is mandatory. So it is a matter of time, you know. This is a transition issue. It is simply a matter of time, and it is not an issue of, because what we often hear is that our private interest will not be served, and there is an obligation. There is no obligation. There is only an obligation to publish the data which you use for the publication. So all the other data are not there. So it is rather restricted. It is not really the full bubble. Remember, that's why I gave you the first slide. It's only the red thing, the red bubble. We are talking about, not the whole issue. So there, it's also not saying that you cannot take patents after. But anyway, if you publish something, you decide on your patent before open access or not. So, but that we have to repeat all the time. So, but we're getting there.
Yeah, it's not actually an issue. The counter-arguments are used for different reasons usually.
Of course.
So just to follow up on that, intellectual property rights around data is a complex, I believe it's a complex issue. But one of the central things around research data, particularly those research collections collected by individual researchers or small teams, does the commission have a view on the IP rights of those data? Are the data, since they are funded by the taxpayer, a public product, or are they owned, if you will, by the individual researcher that collected the data?
There is no, as such, there is no official view on that. My personal view is the first. That's my personal view. Publicly researched data should be publicly available, but that doesn't mean, as I said, the copyright and so on. So, but with respect to having it, I think the key issue there is to make clear, because it mainly is an issue for private companies, if that kind of stuff, and that's where they are very sensitive to. But it is a bit a misunderstanding on what open data is all about. I mean, there is a lot of private research now that we don't have a clue about it. So we are not going to force Google, just to say one company, to put their research in yeah, exactly. So it is only about publicly funded research, and it's only about the data which you use for your publication. Now, this being said, your question opens, I think, well, something which I found very interesting for the future. Let's think 10 years ahead, where all our articles will be data intensive, and you will publish your article and at the same time publish under it the data you used for it. Imagine that your data are downloaded 15,000 times more than your article. Now, it's not a matter of ownership, but it's a matter of intellectual ownership. Will that be rewarded in your career? And that is the thing that will come up in the future very quickly. I think these are the really important issues for the future. Will the activity of the data activity of science, which will become mainstream, be rewarded as much as anything else of your science? And there you have an issue of property, I would say. So there I think, and the publishing companies are working on it. There I think we need to develop metrics, so that also the data you produce and the use that is made of the data you produced, regardless of your article, are being gratified somewhere in your scientific activity. So that there you have a kind of ownership issue.
Well, I'm very happy about your comment on rewarding. It is not the direct issue for our today's meeting, but actually to promote openness in science. What is a fundamental challenge? It is to build a completely new paradigm for scientific evaluation, for all of the funding systems based on performance, and in particular, creating data collections is one of the new aspects to be accounted for, but actually it's also about other tools. Software, if you develop a software that is used by nearly everybody, is this a real achievement worth being somehow awarded? If you present your protocols for all of, not only results, but also protocols for your experiments or observations, is this also a kind of asset? So in general, the whole system of evaluation is to be re-examined in the context of new technologies already present and coming.
No, I fully agree with you. I think that, first of all, out of our questionnaire and validation and discussion with X many hundreds of scientists and stakeholders, so there were 3 big issues that came out of as a bottleneck for open science. One is the infrastructure governance thing, so the cloud stuff. Second, incentives. Where are the incentives for open science? Because almost all researchers told us, yes, of course we want it, but if I'm not rewarded, I will not open my data. If I'm punished for it, so there is a big issue there. So reciprocity of whatever cloud environment we think of is essential. If I put my data, I must also be able to get other data, otherwise I don't do it. And the third thing was set up funding possibilities for creating open science. So in the second slot comes your remark, but I think it will happen sui generis. We we cannot stop these things. You already see interesting developments in altmetrics. For example, Cambridge University, they have now a dashboard per researcher measuring not only his high impact journals, but all his journals, the blogs he makes, the data he produces, and the use made of the data. So you get a much richer, because that's the point, you get a much richer indication of what a scientist is actually doing, and that we have to. It will happen, and if I'm not wrong, I think last year. No, I'm not wrong. Last year, the National Science Foundation in the US, which is not particularly on the forefront of these things, but they accepted already last year that for whatever you want to submit a grant, a proposal, you have to list your 5 most important products. No longer high impact journal articles, but your products. It can be a high impact journal, but it can also be a non-high impact journal. It can be a data set. It can be a piece of software. And so if that happens, if that gets generalized, and it will follow the
DMP.
Yeah.
It's obligatory.
So the rest will follow. And again, if you think scientifically, so I have published an article which is not very well read or quoted, but all my data are used worldwide enormously. What does it say about me? Am I a bad scientist? No. I have a good nose for finding the data, but maybe of not correlating them. So, and don't forget, I mean, and then I close down my comment, I mean, the high impact journals, this is 0.7% of the scientific production. So it's a little bit stupid that we don't look at all the rest, and now we have the tools to look at all the rest. So we can quantify much better what the scientist is really doing in the whole life cycle of his research, so to speak. So I think it's an opportunity.